Welcome to the AP podcast. Today we have Daniel Feeney with us. What's up, Daniel?
What's going on, man?
Yeah, man, I'm super stoked to have you on the show today because you're probably one of the most knowledgeable people I've had on the show so far. So a little background about Daniel for the viewers listening today would be Daniel actually started out running track. He's a track runner, endurance athlete. He went through and he actually coached track, and he really didn't get into bodybuilding or anything that's kind of related to me for a little while. But then after college, he became very versatile. And Daniel now is a professional bodybuilder. He does powerlifting. He's a contest prep coach. So he's managed a lot of people. And so he really knows a lot when it comes to the science about exercise, science, and performance. So I just want to say again, welcome, Daniel. Super pumped, and I'm super pumped to get into the science today about carbohydrate utilization and all sorts of things that can help people's performance in the gym and also with either their gaining phase or their weight loss phase. All right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for
man. Well, yeah, give us a little more background about your intro to the fitness industry, how you kind of came up, made your way through the ranks and became a pro, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I started off, like you said, running track in college. So I was the typical skinny guy. I didn't really have much muscle. That always was like I loved the appeal of the big muscle body guys, but I just never thought I could hold it on my frame. I was like, if I start running over 20 miles a week, I can't hold an ounce of muscle on me. I just started. Most of my training was well above 20 miles a week, but I ran, and then I started coaching endurance athletes, and that's where I started to see, well, if I'm going to coach, if I'm going to make some protocols for other people, I should necessarily know, start seeing trends of what's better. And I know we're talking about carbohydrate usage today. That was actually where I started. And to be honest, my knowledge on, I think that was a very good primer for me to carry over into bodybuilding, coaching, understanding how the body uses carbohydrates and the different energy pathways. So I know in my coaching for endurance athletes and such, the energy pathway was always a very key thing that we were looking to build upon.
And I don't really know a lot about endurance athletes as much as, priming them for or peaking them and stuff, or really fueling them. Is that a pretty just a high carbohydrate complete influx of glucose periodically throughout the training, or do you actually go into trying to just mainly use fat oxidation?
So fat oxidation, it depends on how intense or how, the rate of energy that they're going to be using. So I always look at it in like I'm an engineer by trade, so like I'm very technical as far as, okay, so what's the activity? Is it going to be a long endurance race? Is it going to be a marathon? Do I have a marathon athlete where the energy demand, consistent demand is going to be a little slower? So we can utilize a fat burning energy system, or do we really need to jump over into a carbohydrate utilization energy system, glycolysis or glucogenesis and such? And so then you kind of backfeed what we do to support those energy systems and build your body in order to stay in that energy system, if that's what's going to keep you with consistent energy throughout the duration of that performance, or whether we should, on other energy systems in your training. So like a good example, I had one guy I was writing nutrition for there's a popular Spartan 24-hour Spartan race. I guess once a year it's a 24-hour race. So I think Brent Ruby did a study on the body's utilization of calories and how many calories the body can actually expend over a 24-hour period. And he was even calculating up to like 19,000 calories in a day. So are you going to get that from one 2-3 days of refeeding. No, you're going to have to find an energy system that can also break down and utilize the food that you're taking in over the hours as well. So I really kind of dove into the weeds as far as carbohydrate usage, its digestion. Can you do that while sustaining performance? Is it a shorter duration, like a sprint triathlon or a weight training session that you can really just fill your body up and then deplete it? And as far as I started moving more towards the physique side of things, when you start looking at, okay, if it's just a training bout, what type of hormonal changes do you see if you do deplete completely and then restore post-training? Or is it advantageous to support the energy usage and not deplete, not send your body that signal of depleting? And, back and forth, I mean, we'll cover it a little bit more, but we're finding that, yeah, it is a little bit more advantageous to send your body those signals of ups and downs, as long as you understand the swings. Because mostly I like, I don't know whether Lane Norton or one of those guys likes to explain the body as like a pendulum. If you hit it one way, it's going to swing back the other. Mm-hmm. So if you understand the system, then you can ride that wave, so to speak. As far as training bout, will hit high note over here and then support the systems in order to create a high note over here, which would be a recovery phase or such. Mm-hmm. You can kind of play with the body and support both sides of the pendulum. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of where I started my training and kind of built my knowledge on energy systems, and then transferred over. I was tired of being a small track runner, so ego got into the way of things after college. I realized I wanted to do a little bit more strength training, so I got into it, and I was seeing that once again nutrition was the be all. I mean, I could go in there and crush myself in the gym. That wasn't hard to do, but the hard part was nutrition. And I saw that if I was a little bit more disciplined, like, hey, bodybuilding, most people can't diet. I can diet. I can be more disciplined in that avenue. So let me see, that might be an avenue for me to compete. Yeah, I did my first show, loved it. I didn't know what I was doing, but
when none of us do.
Yeah. So it's funny. There's like two types of people in the world. There's one type of person that walks in, is like, sees it, way over their head, and they kind of bow out. And there's other people that are like, oh man, look at the opportunities that I can just grow and expand into this. There's a whole new realm that I can expand in. So that's more or less how I took that. And I think that's the right mindset you can carry on in bodybuilding field or career if you want to outlast people.
Yes. So, yeah. Awesome. And then you got, let's see, how many competitions do you think you've competed in now?
I've actually competed in 5. So I did one, and I realized, oh man, I got to go back to the drawing board. These guys have me, I got wiped clean, but I showed up, I was the leanest guy. And actually, so that first competition, it was 2014. I got lean enough. That's the only reason why I placed well. And then the next 6 months from there, I really just played with my body. Wasn't good for my physique at all, but I stayed stage lean, and I just tried, all right, this week I'm going to do a refeed of 400 grams of carbs in a single 4-hour window, or let me try next week. And I always try to deplete and try again. I was starting to feel crummy at the end of a 6-month period, but I learned a lot about myself. Learned a lot about the body's metabolism, how it can handle carbs, and I was also playing with water, sodium, and everything. I tried all the bro science, and then filter in some more scientific literature in there as well to build my knowledge.
Which I see a lot of my stuff that I've used for clients and myself is a mixture of bro science and literature science. I don't know what you've seen for patterns, but some stuff I don't understand, but some stuff just works every time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so there's research-backed data, and then there's our field in bodybuilding sphere. Most people don't get studies on contest lean individuals, so there is a lot of in the rumor mill. Oh, what worked? All right, let's try this, and everyone's different. So what works for a male might not work for a female, vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And female on the front end of her cycle, as far as peaking out female on the back end of her cycle. The body's so different. So it's crazy how much. So you're kind of ignorant if you don't kind of delve into all the avenues that you can gain knowledge from and test it out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I agree 100%. But let's dive into the carbohydrate stuff for today. I kind of want to start out for everybody listening. Maybe there's going to be a wide audience. There's going to be people who don't really know a lot about carbohydrates at all. And then there's going to be people probably knowing the whole TCA cycle and, everything with glycolysis and blah, 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 blah. So I guess, can you just give us a general overview of what a carbohydrate is, and what is it mainly used for in our bodies? Kind of just go through that, because I want to ask you about hormonal responses to carbohydrates and that pendulum that you were talking about. I would love for you to go into that a little bit. And yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, carbohydrates. The main thing, what you're looking at for carbohydrate for performance reasons or understanding which type of carbohydrate you're ingesting. It's either like a polysaccharide, a monosaccharide, or disaccharide. So anything that's gonna, then you look at digestion rates. So I'm always looking at like what's coming in the body and what's getting to the final stages of ATP, more or less ATP, which is generating the force in your muscles, whatever, energy. So, and then what along that process chain can we aid with a supplement or water, or ions, and what might hinder that. So any type of polysaccharide or disaccharide, the body's going to have to break down. It's a bigger chain molecule. So breaking that down into a monosaccharide, something that the body can actually transport and use. And so you'll look at, you're not going to necessarily want to consume a sweet potato before a training bout. That's not a pre-workout carbohydrate, even though it's a very healthy carbohydrate, a starchy carb. For training purposes, you're going to want to look for a monosaccharide, something that's going to easily digest.
And when you say right before training, what is the time period?
I like doing between 30 and 45 minutes. And I even have some athletes that kind of cut that window short. And this generally goes on how they feel. Because even though you can do things to increase the gastric emptying, you don't necessarily want a belly full of food when you're getting ready to work out intense. So that changes by the individual a little bit. And so I always ask people, why don't you try out both kind of ends of the time frame and then see how you feel on it, and keep that carbohydrate constant when you're trying those. So I always recommend like a dextrose, and then if you want to get even more in tune, you can look at a
cyclic dextrin. Do you like to use that?
Dextrin, right? So for us in the bodybuilding frame, again, now we're talking about hormonal changes with the foods that we eat. So do you necessarily want a insulin spike from your carbohydrate? It depends. Do you want it pre-training? Because then you're hitting that pendulum up. You don't necessarily want that insulin spike pre-training. Can you utilize that insulin spike post-training? Yes, because that's a very good shuttling hormone to get carbohydrates, amino acids, start the repair process. So you want that necessarily on the back end. So that's where that cyclical dextrose, dextrin is getting hype now for like a pre-workout, because it digests very quickly. As long as you have water in it, you aid in gastric emptying for gut gut empty and get it into the small intestines quickly, get it into bloodstream. But then once it's in the bloodstream, it does take, your body still has to break those chains down. So it doesn't create that insulin spike that another dextrose, just non-branched dextrose would be. So you use a highly branched monosaccharide pre-training and intra-training, and then post-training is when you would want something that's not branched in order to create that insulin spike. Your body will see that it's hitting the bloodstream quick and also available to be shuttled into muscle cells, mitochondria, whatever, very quickly. So that's where you would want to increase that insulin.
Yeah. So then I guess a couple questions. One, explain your reasoning by not wanting to spike insulin pre-training. Also, do you think that there's literature on this, but like the dose response to the amount of carbohydrates to spike your insulin, there's a ceiling for the advantages of it. And also, what was I going to say? Highly branched. So yeah, like why wouldn't you like to spike insulin at all pre-training? Is it because of going hypo, or what do you think? Or lipolysis, preventing fat utilization in the end, or what?
Yeah. So there's two avenues. Anytime you spike insulin, a sequential without a deplete, with a sequential increase in insulin, it'll be buffered. It won't be as great of a response. So you want, in other words, I'm looking at that post-training window to try to hit that highest response.
Because you're depleted.
Right, you're in a catabolic state. So if you keep your body from necessarily going catabolic, that spike might not necessarily be as great. So the expensive isolate protein that you're taking and amino acids post-training, if you want them to hit your muscles as fast as possible to start repairing, you just want that greatest stimulus, the shuttling hormone, insulin.
Yeah. And so I've always, what I asked you is because I've utilized more simpler stuff, especially intra-training. I've used a higher glycemic carbohydrate intra-training, but maybe my methodology is wrong or just different. But obviously the insulin is a shuttling hormone. And so, and insulin seems to, I don't know if this is correct, but what we've been taught is it kind of lowers during training, like it'll actually come down. And so would using a simpler carbohydrate to try and elevate that up, initiate the shuttling of amino acids during your training or before you exit your training? Does that make sense?
Yeah, to almost sustain training during the
just become less catabolic as you can probably become.
Yeah, so there's you would actually achieve that if you were to hit a moderate insulin spike pre-training. However, some of the literature out there I see goes into saying that the actual response in protein synthesis is going to drop. So if you're at repairing to the greatest degree, you would want that to be a deplete. And that goes back to the pendulum. The lower you are or the more depleted you are catabolic, the greater response you'll receive post-training. So you're almost flirting with that to drive yourself lower. And, there's a fine line between like boinking out or whatever in your training. So if you're unable to sustain your training, if you're not hitting your later sets very intense, then yeah, you would look at an intra workout carb and try to sustain energy. And so what I've found is like a cyclical dextrin, you can sustain your energy as well as if you're hitting water and you have some sodium and potassium intra training amino acids. your training intensity shouldn't drop off. If it does, then you can start looking at other hormonal changes with the athlete and seeing maybe their energy usage is not the greatest, or their body's stuck in another. So you'll see this. This is where you see like people transitioning to like a ketogenic diet, running on ketones. They might blink out a few times in their training when they're transitioning. So so that same process is necessarily what you're trying to prevent when you're training using an intra or pre-workout carbohydrate.
Gotcha. So then you're not saying though to not have as many carbs pre-intra for your for the actual amount of grams of carbs. You're just saying to try and reduce the insulin response during those time periods.
Correct. So
Okay.
even depends on the size of my athlete as far as like how much muscle, lean mass he's carrying. However, generally my my pre-workout carbohydrate recommendation and my post-workout amounts is going to be similar. Whether it's
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's going to be generally up higher, and you kind of have to go off of the behavioral changes with the athlete as well. If they're deep in prep, some athletes don't necessarily want to be drinking, 40 grams of carbs between their pre, intra, and post if they only have 80 grams of carbs throughout the day. But if it's sustaining their training and it's sustaining their muscle mass during that bout, you have to give and take a little bit here and there. But what's best for the body systems, we can coach, and then the behavioral side of things, which I'm a big coach on the behavioral side of things as well. So you run that into their programming as well.
Yeah, no, that's all really great. That makes sense. And I've used different ways, and I've used cyclic dextrin, and I know that the gastric emptying is super advantageous. I mean, I noticed a huge difference using that rather than, I mean, sometimes I would go through and I would order every single different carb, whether it was waxy maize, dextrose, cyclic dextrin, blah, 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 blah. And I would try them different intra-workout, and there was a total difference in digestion and just feeling like shit or feeling good, right?
Right. Some stuff just sits heavy, and you're sitting there reading the label. You're like, this doesn't do what it says it's supposed to.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
and I always laugh at people that, I mean, not laugh, but people that shoot like dry shoot pre-workout, that can lead to, if you're not taking it that with a water, suggested amount of water, that might affect your gastric emptying, and you don't necessarily want to create any gastrointestinal disruption when you're getting ready to train. So some people hit the dry pre-workout because they don't have water with them, and then
I feel like
first sets, and oh man, I got some stomach cramps going on.
Yeah, no, I see that. So that's funny. With the method is trying to get it in your system faster, right? But it might backfire. Well, kind of leading past that a little bit, we kind of talked about swinging the pendulum now. I really like that. And doing that depletion phase. And I guess for people listening, all that means is you have glycogen, right, in your muscles. That's our primary source not primary, ATP. And then it's going to be our source of energy throughout our workouts for more of an anaerobic exercise, right?
Sure.
So with you're saying that we want to deplete that as much as we can during our exercise. So then afterwards we have this almost super compensation of an insulin response, correct?
Correct. And that's lower on the priority of events. But as far as if you're looking at carbohydrates, yeah, that's one of the avenues.
Okay.
I mean, training stimulus is number one.
Okay. And I was going to ask you this. I was told this actually recently. I haven't looked into this ever, but it makes sense. What is the mechanisms behind recovery, but also super compensation of glycogen uptake using a certain amount of amino acids with the carbohydrate post workout? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So they're looking into, and I can't say that I have read all the literature on this, but I have seen, as you said, they're looking into amino acid profiles or an advantageous profile might actually help the uptake of carbohydrate digestion. And then whether or not that affects your body's ability to store that glycogen intramuscular. So you get your muscle pool and then your liver pool as far as holding glycogen, your glycogen stores. So and if you're looking for that super compensation effect, then you're looking at whether it's for a performance or getting stage ready. And then, so if you're getting stage ready, then you're even more looking into the effects of whether amino acids are going to help drive that, because amino acids are going to be drawn towards muscle cells. So whether it can pull that carbohydrate and glucose and put that into the muscle, or whether it's going to stay in the bloodstream, be extracellular. So you're looking at that intracellular, extracellular. There's reason to believe that maybe the amino acids might help point it in one direction as opposed to another. But
and is that an essential, a complete EAA profile, or is it just the branch chains, do you think?
They were looking at some of the branch chains, some of the non-essentials as well. But I really haven't seen any conclusive data on that because, yeah, I mean, the other amino acid pool is in your liver as well. So really what is definitive is depletion. So complete depleting. And they've had more, I mean, this is going into my own coaching, as far as when you're trying to super compensate someone, there's so much more literature on making sure there's an advantageous ion exchange. So sodium, you're looking at the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and looking to try to use those as well as insulin to shuttle carbohydrates intracellular. So that's been more hashed out, and it'll be interesting to see whether any of these amino acid profiles help point these the glycogen in one direction or another.
It's interesting. Yeah, I would like to read up more on that. I'm sure there probably is a ceiling or something, but yeah, that's definitely something that's beneficial to us. Let's see. Next one was, so this is a question that I told you that I wasn't going to ask you or tell you about. So I've talked to a lot of people and they really don't know how to say this. Actually, I got two questions, but the first one is refeeds during pretty much a prep or just a severe, like a really lean, or when you get down to a really lean body composition during a weight loss phase. And I know there's like diet breaks, but I'm just talking about like just standard refeeds and not like cheat meals with a bunch of carbs and fats together, but just utilizing straight protein carbohydrate refeeds high. This might go into the pendulum what you're talking about. But my question is why, how does that work in mechanisms of, you're going through prep, right? And you're kind of like this, and you get to kind of maybe somewhat of a stall point, or you're a phase where you're starting to become more depleted, and then you have ingest impulsive carbohydrates, and you wake up the next morning lighter, but full. So kind of explain the metabolic mechanisms going on, if if you can, and then also what your thoughts are on using those. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. So there's a number of like domino effects into how I look at a refeed for an individual, and whether it's like during their prep, how lean they are, how close it is to contest and stage. So I am a fan of refeeds. Diet breaks I don't necessarily like using diet breaks. I like pushing the athlete in one direction or another and kind of like keeping that stimulus on them. So the refeed is going to break that stimulus and actually reverse it. So you're hitting someone with low calories, lower calories than what their body needs day in and day out. for the contest prep, so if they lose body fat. So if they're burning more than they're taking in. All the studies show if you hammer someone like that for long duration time, months on end, their hormones are going to be dropping. So one effective way, and carbohydrates is the greatest stimulus for pushing ghrelin and leptin hormones advantageously to reverse that. So if you hit someone with high carbohydrate intake, you're sending that body a signal with that refeed and maintaining a healthier hormonal panel so that you're not dropping all the way. And that one day of hitting a refeed, taking in calories above and beyond what is needed, the body can not necessarily drop metabolic rate, metabolic processes. If it's saying, okay, all right, we are having days where we're being overfed, so we won't necessarily respond as harshly to these lower days. So that's more or less, that's like in plainer terms that I can put them in for refeeds. And then as far as metabolic processes, there's a lot of data that goes into showing no matter what the carbohydrate intake is, obviously there's digestion rates and stuff like that, but if you hit someone for a 12 to, 20 to 24 hour period of a higher carbohydrate intake, as long as fats are low, the body won't necessarily the storage hormones won't jump up. So
will it just completely carb oxidation, and then it'll kind of shut off fat oxidation, just kind of like totally just metabolize all the carbs?
Yeah, and it goes into the body's not necessarily looking to store it. It's been depleted for a while. So if you're dieting, you have a refeed once every 2 weeks. All of a sudden, you're manipulating that nutrient partitioning effect in your metabolic processes. So when you all of a sudden introduce carbs again, your body is going to key in and nutrient partitioning. It's going to absorb much more carbohydrate intake necessarily than fat. It's going to ignore them for a period of time before it says, okay, now we're getting tons of food. Let's just start storing them because we've been depleted for quite a while. Okay. So that's where some people think they've fallen off the wagon if they have, they're in the middle of a contest prep and all of a sudden they have a huge cheat meal, like whether it's binging or whatever, and they're, oh my God, I just ruined everything. I gained 5 pounds. And like, all right, let's carry on your normal diet for a couple of days. And generally they drop quite drastically. So that's where that nutrient partitioning effect comes into play. And I know I love looking into Lyle McDonald did a study on, well, I think he even wrote a book on massive refeeds, but just depleting the heck out of you during the week and trying to affect that nutrient partitioning, that P ratio. And pretty interesting that you can hammer someone with, someone's getting 900 calories for 5 days, and then their sixth day is they can get up to 1,200 grams of carbs. That's close to, with the rest of the macros, up to 6,000 calories in a single day. And usually they feel like junk, but they're hitting their hormones with a massive refeed. And so they're really only losing body fat on those 4 days or whatever. 1 or 2 days is depleting. So yeah, 2 or 3 days out of the week they're losing, and then they're wildly swinging on the other end. And so that's a method that you can, I like to explain as like you're getting away with it, because is that optimal? No, not necessarily. Behavioral wise, structuring your week, meal planning, all that stuff, it's not optimal. Training wise, such. So yeah, it's not an effective contest prep strategy, but smaller scale, it is optimal. So throwing those diet breaks in and refeeds can be advantageous to keep your hormonal panel as healthy as possible as you're going into contest prep. And as you know, it's impossible to completely keep your metabolism at its basal rate, right when you start to its when you're stepping on stage, but you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. No, and that's what I was gonna kind of going into that is it just sounds like the most important thing with the refeeds is the hormonal response, but um, the having a huge impulse of carbohydrates and then waking up the next morning lighter. Um, so you're saying that pretty much there's a increase in your metabolism to metabolize all those carbohydrates, and then there's a kind of like an after effect uh, from thermogenesis, or I don't know, after effect to keep it going through the next couple days. So it's like your metabolism's here and it's going down. You have a huge impulse of carbs. It's got to try to get up and match that, and then this peak is greater than where it was when you before you left off, and then it kind of goes like this. So kind of like does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like that chart mechanism because you're seeing one stimulus is affecting, or you can manipulate faster than the hormonal response. So that's where drive the metabolism up a little bit, cut calories drastically. So then you've got a window, an area below the curve of when you're losing fat, not necessarily dropping the hormonal panel. So
So it's just a huge calorie cycle.
yeah, absolutely.
And then with that calorie cycle, was he just like straight protein, or was he like uh protein and like somewhat fat, medium fat? What was he doing with his calories, and then just having pretty much zero carbs?
It was moderate fat, generally high protein. Well, yeah, high protein for the average.
Yeah.
Average
That'll be another podcast.
athlete. So, and then all of a sudden, fat went down to as at minimum as possible, and carbohydrates were through the roof. Pretty much just going on the person's digestion rate at that point. And it's funny, I did have one athlete. I was manipulating their diet for performance, but I would have them try something similar, and I remember it got to the point where the guy was making me crack it up. He's like, "Holy cow, I can't! I'm going to eat my arm on these other days, and my training is terrible." But then all of a sudden, you think I'm going to be Godzilla on Saturday, and like all these carbs. He's like, one, I'm scaring away all my family members. They think I'm like losing it. He's like, you think I'm freaking Godzilla over here pounding? He's like, I ate 2 sleeves of bagels a day, so it was pretty comical, but and it worked. I mean, it got the guy ready, but like I said, it wasn't optimal.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise,
Did they tell what was the results from that? Like, what did he drop in what amount of time? What happened?
he dropped. This guy, he had some weight to drop, but he dropped a good 15 pounds in I think it was like a 90-day period. So it was quick, and you could do that in other. I don't think it was superior.
Yeah, I feel like you could do that with not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. That's more or less what you saw. And I mean, he wasn't starving for a refeed because he knew when his refeeds did come, they were obnoxious. But so it did a funny thing to his mindset as far as that binging goes. But and that was, to be honest, it was the behavioral basis more or less why I was structuring his diet in that manner, because he said he needed a day to just kind of let loose. So I said, all right, you're going to earn it throughout the week. And so, I mean, the diet worked, but I think it would have been a little bit more easier to follow if you were to have a more balanced macro profile throughout the week.
Yeah, probably. Well, awesome. No, that's all really great information. And I'm sure that I'm going to have more questions for you another time, but that's kind of like a general guideline of people who have heard about carb cycling, right? Or people have heard about this calorie cycling, or what is it? How is it advantageous? And so a lot of people are scared of carbohydrates and scared of like waking up in the morning a couple pounds or a pound or so heavier, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going the wrong direction. And it's like, well, hold on a second, hold on. So yeah, I think that's great. And I'll probably have some more questions for you that I can post up another time too.
All right, very good.
But now transitioning to supplements. So you like to really dive into certain supplements. I want to talk about carb utilization. If you like to use GDAs, if you like to, I don't know what other ones that I've used for carbohydrate utilization, but kind of go into trying to create more of an insulin sensitive environment, maybe what other stuff that you like to use with clients.
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying nothing works better than a small little deplete or like a diet or off-season break, mini cut, whatever you want to call it, as far as enhancing your insulin sensitivity. However, if you're hammering away in the off-season, you're in a really great training block where you're hitting high intensity or high strength. You don't necessarily want to take any diet breaks or be in a deficit for any period of time. That's when that's when I'll look to maybe a GDA, either a blend. Most of the blends work well across the general population. If you do want to separate those ingredients,
Yeah. I like to use RILA, but I don't know what you prefer.
well, I do work with First Form. They've got a really great blend.
Oh, that's right.
That makes it very easy for me.
Yeah.
I can not look to any other product since their blend is very well formulated. So I like there's a couple other products on the market. I know just cinnamon, carnitine, and berberine. Those I've seen effective across not only like whites but black athletes as well, and across whether it's in a deficit or in a surplus. So normally I don't touch them when they're in a deficit, but every so often if you want to utilize those carbs from a refeed when they're in contest prep, might throw them in. But usually at least my trends have not been consistent enough to make an assumption whether the GDAs are as effective during contest prep, because you're really only getting a figure once a week or maybe twice a week for refeeds. But and the body's always changing the contest. So GDAs, I do like using them for peaking someone out in their off season. So like a growth phase, towards the end of that growth phase, it can be helpful using a GDA formula. And
Do you
then
use it in your weight loss phase at all when you're depleting? Have you tried that and see any effects from it?
I have delved into that with more endomorph body types, somatotypes. So if I'm dealing with an athlete that's more of a ectomorph or mesomorph, I really don't see any benefit there.
Do you think there's a negative effect even?
Negative effect only in that they might burn through the energy very quickly. So it might make them hungrier later on in the day, and it doesn't necessarily increase fat loss or anything. It's not like, oh, it's a stimulant like a caffeine burning through. It's not necessarily that. It just gives them that hunger hormonal response earlier. So I don't necessarily like just making someone hungry for no reason. So that's like what I was finding to be my indicator there. So an endomorph, someone that doesn't necessarily digest carbohydrates as efficiently as someone else. If you hit them with a hard refeed, big refeed during their contest prep, you do want that to be effective. So I've flirted with using a GDA on those days, like first thing in the morning upon waking before they hit their first high carb meal. And some of it goes into they just thought that they felt a little tighter at the end of the days when they did use the GDAs as opposed to not. But yeah, so normally if it's a mesomorph or ectomorph, I don't even bother with them. It's just another variable that could disrupt other signalings. So I usually don't like. I like limiting setting my controls very tightly during a contest prep. So anything thrown into the mix don't want to ruin my signaling for other.
What else do you like to use in the sense of first carbohydrates? I know we kind of just talked about. You said you like to use dextrose, HB or highly branched chain cyclic dextrin. What other things do you see that helps with carbohydrate utilization?
I do see a higher sodium diet, and then I like to hit starchy carbs digestion with that are high in potassium. So I don't necessarily like to hammer someone with potassium pre, intra, or post, but if they're getting potassium in the rest of their diet, I see that carries over very well into training, cramping, and then also getting full, getting pumps if you're taking water and sodium with your pre-workout.
Yeah, what is your, because a lot of people just only talk about sodium and sodium loading and all that stuff, but I know you and Cliff have this crazy potassium shit going on, and I think it's really interesting. I've never tried it, I don't even understand all this. But
Cliff's up here, and I'm just trying to learn more and more so that I can try to bridge that gap a little bit. But no, yeah, potassium is usually an overlooked aid, or at least mechanism that goes into intracellular, extracellular water transfer and carbohydrate transfer. So as it pulls glucose and water. So you're looking at either making it more easier to transport that cellular wall or cellular membrane, or not as easy. So you try to manipulate that to, if you're jacking carbs up, so if you're peaking someone, you want to be making sure the body has the potassium, has the ions there in order to create that transfer.
Yeah.
You'll have a huge circulating pool of glycogen in the bloodstream, but it's unable to pass that the cellular membrane. And so, yeah, you're looking to flirting with that with the athlete, especially if you can do that post-competition, pre-competition in a testing phase. You can really hash out the minor details on that, and have someone come in that tad bit sharper might be the difference between third and first.
So you're saying you like to structure more potassium, structure your carbs and stuff maybe a little earlier, or depending on when your training period is, but a little earlier outside of that time zone, and then kind of structure sodium more around the training, or how?
There's sodium and potassium to a certain degree, but sodium passes very quickly, especially if you're on a higher sodium diet. Your adenosine hormone can pass quite a bit of sodium and handle more. So that can be utilized better in training if you can, if your body's ability to handle it. So if they're taking in potassium earlier in their day, that's already in their bloodstream, that's already stored. And then sodium, it can be absorbed quickly, help the carbohydrate absorption and hit the muscles for pump. You can hit that pre-workout, and I usually don't do any sodium intra-workout, but just pre-workout is generally enough. Use a few shakes of the salt shaker into your pre-workout.
Have you combined sodium and like glycerol or like Hydromax or some other sort of, I guess not like an NO booster like citrulline or something like that, but I guess for carbohydrate utilization it's kind of different. But have you used sodium and you have good effects mixing it with glycerol?
I have, yeah. And some of the powerlifters have felt fuller, which is, bodybuilders like to look full in their posing and such, but glycerol, sometimes it will deem a normal dose a little bit too heavy. So you'll see someone getting a little blurry if they're a bodybuilder, and you have those measurements, those amounts very hashed out as far as their ability, like what that body's metabolism can handle. So I see if you introduce it all of a sudden, it might spill over. However, for powerlifters, I've seen that they feel fuller and they can, and this is going into the bro science, but they feel like they can get a little bit more contraction, more power. So, I mean, that's something I throw at them because they don't necessarily need to look good on stage.
Yeah. Unless they're trying to. Well, awesome. Well, I mean, is there any other stuff that you've seen that would be beneficial for people listening to do with supplements for carbohydrate utilization?
Yes, lots of times you get into the weeds looking at supplements, and some of the best things I've found that really help athletes out is understanding how their gut digests these the differences in polysaccharides versus of a monosaccharide or a disaccharide with some fructose as opposed to just straight polysaccharides as a starchy carb. So if you understand how your body digests, and this takes time, you have to play with it. You have to try a heavy starch, and then you have to try different things and see how you digest them, because everyone seems to be a bit different. And I've even worked with some endurance athletes and bodybuilders alike that they'll feel good on one carb, they'll switch over, and if it's more of a fermented carb or such, they don't feel well. So understanding your gut flora and whether you're introducing prebiotics or probiotics into just being able to be more efficient at digesting the carbs that you are taking in, this can be beneficial as well. Because I've even walked someone's carbs up very high, and then they always felt kind of sluggish, and then deep into their off season when their carbs are very high and they're maintaining their weight very well, they become more efficient at digesting their food with a prebiotic, probiotic, just whether they go to their doctor or they just try something, and then all of a sudden you see them gaining weight or you see them losing weight. So it's very interesting to see how much that gut flora can change, whether it's off season or in season, or depending on what else you're ingesting, fermented carbs, or you get sick and you get put on a antibiotic or something like that, can wipe you clean. So that's something to take into effect. That supplements might not always be the answer to get better results. You might just profile.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree 100% with the gut flora stuff. It's a lot more important than people take or think that it is. I mean, like, calories in, calories out, everybody's worried about this and that, the basics. But I think that the next thing I actually look at is that, because, I look at a lot, especially in females, for me at least, I've seen it, especially in females, the pre and probiotics have been really important depending on, how their body's responding. But I see that with people trying to gain weight, and they hit the ceiling and they're like, leptin and ghrelin are like, stop eating. and so to kind of digest food better, obviously you switch into some liquid calories, but the probiotics have worked tremendously. And I like to use, I like to start out with organic, like sauerkraut or organic kimchi or something before going to a supplement, but I'll incorporate it if I need to. But I think that that actually helps a lot, and it actually helps a lot with the weight loss process too, I think, and what you're saying with the digestion. So
no, that's a very good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. Before you tell a client to go out and buy a supplement, you can play around with foods, kimchi or kefir for if someone doesn't mind dairy, something like that, to see. And if you see benefits from that, you sit there and say, either we can continue on that road of those foods if you enjoy eating them. If you don't enjoy eating them, you can take a supplement. And that can kind of point you in the right direction as if this will be benefit or not. So yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, if there's anything else, my man, that's all I have for today. We kind of been going for, I don't know, about an hour now. I love it. It's such great information. I'm super excited to get this out. But yeah, anything else for us?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on, and it was a pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, man, we'll have to do it again sometime for sure. Well, what I'm going to do, guys, is put Dan's Instagram and his email and everything in the description box. So if you have any questions for him or me, I'll put my stuff in there too. But have any questions for him? He's really obviously well educated. So any questions, feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure, I don't know if he's taking on any clients right now, but you can email him and see what's going on there. But yeah, and then also, if you liked all the information, please trying to get this podcast going up off the ground, interviewing some top-notch people. So give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel because there's going to be a lot more content coming. And then also DM me or comment, any suggestions you have or you would like to hear about. So other than that, guys, Dan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure.
Dude, absolutely. Anytime.
Anytime. All right. Well, hey, other than that, we will talk to you guys next time. Peace.
Peace.